I was refilling my coffee at the hotel breakfast buffet in Portland when I saw my husband across the room with his arm around a woman old enough to be his mother. He didn't see me. He was too busy laughing at something she said, his head tilted down toward her in that way he only does when he's completely at ease. She wore a cream blazer and had silver hair cut sharp at her jaw. Her hand rested on his forearm like it belonged there. I stood at the coffee station for probably 10 seconds, maybe 15. Long enough for a stranger to excuse herself past me and reach for the orange juice. Long enough to decide exactly what I was going to do. I walked straight to their table, my husband's face when he looked up and saw me standing there. I will never forget that face for as long as I live. It was like watching someone miss a step in the dark. "Good morning," I said, and I smiled at the woman first. "I don't think we've met. I'm his wife." She pulled her hand back from his arm. "Your husband talks about you constantly," she said, recovering fast. She was good. "You must be so proud of the work he's doing on the Meridian account." I looked at my husband. "The Meridian account. Is that what we're calling it?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "Enjoy your breakfast," I said, and I walked back upstairs to our room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for a very long time. My name is June. I'm 32 years old. My husband and I have been married for 4 years, together for 7. We met in grad school in Seattle at a department happy hour when neither of us wanted to be. He was finishing his MBA. I was working toward my master's in urban planning. We stayed until midnight talking about cities we wanted to live in and cities we never wanted to leave. A week later, he took me to a rooftop bar and said he'd never met anyone who made him want to stay in one place. I thought that was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. We moved to Portland 2 years after we got married. He took a position at a mid-size investment firm. I landed a job with a regional planning consultancy. We bought a house in the Selwood neighborhood with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed updating. Life was not glamorous, but it was ours, and for a long time, it felt like enough. The business trip started about 8 months ago. Seattle mostly, sometimes San Francisco. He'd be gone 3 or 4 days, come back tired, kiss me on the forehead, and fall asleep on the couch watching baseball. I noticed the trips were getting longer. I noticed he'd started leaving the room to take calls. I noticed a new kind of distance in him that I didn't have a name for yet. The kind that isn't coldness exactly, more like absence. Like he was physically present but somewhere else entirely. I told myself it was work stress. He'd mentioned a new client, a high-profile restructuring deal, complicated stakeholders. I told myself that explained everything. It explained nothing. 3 weeks before the Portland trip, I found a receipt tucked inside the inner pocket of his travel blazer. I was hanging it up after he'd tossed it over a chair. The receipt was from a jewelry store in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. One item. A bracelet. $480. Gift wrapped. I photographed it. Put it back. Said nothing. The Portland trip was supposed to be a work conference, 2 nights, firm-sponsored. He'd mentioned it weeks ago. But the morning he left, I got a notification that a client meeting I'd had scheduled for that Friday had been rescheduled. And I thought about that receipt. And I bought a train ticket. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I told myself that the whole ride down, I was just going to Portland. I was going to walk around the city by myself and clear my head and probably feel foolish for the paranoia. Instead, I walked into the hotel breakfast room and found my husband with his arm around a woman I'd never seen in my life. After I went back upstairs, my phone rang within 4 minutes. I watched his name light up the screen 3 times before I answered. June. His voice was careful. "Let me come up. I'm not stopping you." He was at the door in under 2 minutes. He must have run. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, and I stayed on the bed, and we looked at each other across that hotel room, like 2 people who had forgotten how to speak the same language. "She's the client," he said. "Adeline Marsh. She's the majority stakeholder in the Meridian Group. I know what a client is." "It's not what it looked like." "Then explain what it looked like, because from where I was standing, it looked like a man with his arm around a woman who was not his wife, in a hotel where he told me he'd be attending a conference." He rubbed his face with both hands. "The conference ended yesterday. She asked me to stay an extra night. There's a dinner tonight with her board. It's a significant account, June. This deal could change things for us. You bought her a bracelet. He went very still. I found the receipt, I said, 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting to see what you'd do with the information, but you didn't do anything with it except keep lying. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was a thank you gift, he finally said. She did us a favor on a financing structure. It was a professional courtesy. $480 is not a professional courtesy. That's a personal one. He didn't answer. I picked up my overnight bag from the floor, which I hadn't even fully unpacked, and I zipped it closed. Where are you going? He asked. Home. I pulled out my phone to order a car. You should stay for your dinner. I said it the same way I'd said everything else that morning. Flat, measured, like I was discussing a minor scheduling conflict and not the possible collapse of my entire adult life. I don't know where that came from. Some self-protective part of my brain that decided I was not going to fall apart in a Portland hotel room while my husband sat in a chair by the window with nothing adequate to say. I cried on the train. Not loudly, just quietly, with my face turned toward the window and my reflection staring back at me through the dark tunnels and the grey-green blur of the Willamette Valley in November. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table for an hour. Then I called my sister. She drove over that night with a bottle of wine and the expression of someone who has been waiting to be called for a long time. She didn't say I told you so. She never does. But she has this way of listening where everything she doesn't say fills up the room. What do you actually know? She asked when I'd finished telling her everything. I know he's been lying to me for months. I know he bought a woman a gift he didn't tell me about. I know he had his arm around her in a way that wasn't professional. But you don't know if there's something physical. No. Do you want to know? I turned my wine glass in a slow circle on the table. I don't know what I want. I want to understand what's been happening to my marriage. I want to know if what I've had for 7 years is real. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think you need to talk to someone who can help you figure out your options before you talk to him again. Not a counselor. A lawyer. I hadn't said the word divorce once that night. She was the one who said it, or implied it, and I noticed that I didn't recoil from it the way I thought I would. My husband came home the next afternoon. He brought flowers, which I thought was either a very good sign or a very bad one. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the flowers on the counter behind him still in their paper wrapping. I need you to tell me the truth, I said. Not the version you've been practicing on the train ride home. The actual truth. He looked at the table for a long time. Adeline and I have been close, he said. Closer than I've told you. Nothing has happened. But I won't pretend the feelings aren't complicated. I'd prepared myself for worse, and somehow this was worse anyway. How long? 6 months. Maybe 7. Since the trip started. Yes. Does she know you're married? He nodded. And she doesn't care. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I stood up and went to the kitchen window and looked out at our backyard. The maple tree we planted the first fall in this house had dropped all its leaves. The yard looked stripped down and honest, in a way the rest of my life had not. I need you to leave for a few days, I said. I need to think without you in this house. He left that night. He took a duffel bag and went to stay with a friend from the firm. He texted me to say where he'd be. I read the text and set my phone face down on the nightstand. I spent the next 3 days doing 2 things, working, because the world doesn't stop for personal disasters, and quietly gathering information. I went through our shared financial accounts, methodically, not angrily, just carefully. What I found over the course of 2 days made my hands shake in a way the jewelry receipt hadn't. In the last 7 months, my husband had made a series of cash withdrawals from our joint savings. Not large enough individually to trigger an alert, but added up just over $11,000. Gone. No corresponding charges in our normal spending. No explanation in the transactions. I also found that he'd opened a separate checking account 4 months ago. I found this not by snooping into his email, but by noticing a statement that had been mailed to the house and that he'd clearly meant to intercept before I saw it. It had slipped behind the recycling bin. I found it when I was breaking down cardboard boxes. The account had a balance of just over $8,000. I called a family law attorney the next morning. Her name was on a referral list a friend had sent me after her own divorce 2 years prior. She had an office downtown on the 6th floor of a glass building that looked out over the river. She had short hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she spoke in the even, practical way of someone who has seen every version of this situation and remains unshaken by all of them. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, she told me. Marital misconduct doesn't affect asset division in most cases. What matters is what's marital property and what isn't. He's been moving money, I said. Cash withdrawals, a separate account. She wrote something down. That's potentially a dissipation of marital assets issue. If he's been spending marital funds on a third party, gifts, hotel stays, meals, we can make an argument for reimbursement in the settlement. I don't know what I want yet. I haven't decided. That's okay, she said, but I'd recommend documenting everything you found now before anything else changes. I photographed the bank statements. I photographed the account statement I'd found behind the recycling bin. I kept the receipt I'd already photographed. I wrote down dates and amounts in a notebook I kept in my desk at work. I didn't feel powerful doing any of this. I felt exhausted and sad and like someone moving through a task that needed to be done regardless of how I felt about it. On the 4th day, my husband asked if he could come home to talk. I said yes. He sat at the kitchen table again. He looked like he hadn't slept well. Good, I thought, and then immediately felt tired of thinking that way. I want to fix this, he said. I know I've broken your trust. I know I've been lying. I want to tell you everything and I want us to try. Tell me everything then. He did, or at least more than he had before. He'd been spending time with Adeline outside of work for about 6 months, dinners when he was in Seattle. A weekend trip he'd told me was a firm retreat. The bracelet, he insisted again that they had not been physically involved. He said she represented something he'd been afraid to name, some version of his life that felt different from the one he was living, and that he'd let himself get close to that feeling without thinking through what it was costing. And now, I asked, now I'm sitting in my own kitchen being asked to account for 7 months of being a coward, he said quietly, and realizing I might have already lost the only thing that actually matters. I looked at him across the table, this man I had sat across from 1,000 times. I thought about the rooftop bar in Seattle where he'd said he'd never met anyone who made him want to stay in one place. I found the separate account, I said. He closed his eyes. The cash withdrawals. He said nothing. How much of our money went to her? He told me. It was close to what I calculated. He said it all again, flat and factual, like reading from a ledger of his own worst decisions. I'm going to see a lawyer, I said. I've already seen one. I'm not saying that's the decision I've made, but I need you to understand that I'm protecting myself now, and I need you to not do anything with the accounts or the assets while I figure out what I want. He agreed, quietly, without argument, which was either the first honest thing he'd done in months or a strategy. And I no longer trusted myself to know which. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, a Seattle area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Is this June?" The voice was measured and self-possessed and immediately recognizable as belonging to someone accustomed to being listened to. It was Adeline Marsh. "Yes," I said. "I think we should meet." I sat down at my desk. "Why?" "Because I have information about your husband that you should have before you make any decisions, and I'd rather give it to you directly than have it come out some other way." There was a long pause in which I considered every possible version of what this conversation could be. "Tell me now," I said. "On the phone, right now." Another pause. Then your husband approached me. Not the other way around. He'd done research on my company and came to the firm with a proposal for our accounts specifically. He told his supervisor he had a personal connection to my board. He didn't. He manufactured the introduction. I said nothing. He's been building a case to bring me in as a client not because of the commission, she said, but because of an investment I have access to that isn't public yet. A pre-IPO position in a biotech company that his firm doesn't have clearance to touch. He's been trying to get me to introduce him to the principals so he can invest privately outside of his firm's compliance structure. The room felt like it had shifted. He told you this. He didn't need to tell me. I've been in finance for 30 years. I know what someone looks like when they're cultivating access. I allowed it because the account is legitimate and his work on it has been good. But last month he asked me directly to make an introduction to the company's founder. He implied, she paused. He implied our personal closeness would be part of the arrangement. I set my coffee mug down very carefully on the desk. He was using you, I said slowly, and the relationship, or whatever you'd call it, was part of that. I don't know if it was only that, she said, and she sounded tired in a way that surprised me. But I think you should know the full picture. I don't make a habit of involving myself in other people's marriages. I made a poor decision in allowing this to go as far as it did, and I'm choosing to be honest with you about what I know. I thanked her. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Then I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time. My husband hadn't just been emotionally unfaithful. He hadn't just been spending our money. He'd potentially been committing securities fraud. He'd been using an almost affair as professional leverage. And he'd hidden all of it inside the story of a neglected marriage and a complicated client, banking on me believing the simplest version of a situation that was anything but simple. I called my attorney back that afternoon. I need to add something to what we discussed, I said. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. If what this woman is telling you is accurate, and your husband made unsanctioned investment inquiries outside his firm's compliance framework, that's potentially a FINRA violation. Depending on what he actually did or didn't do, it could also involve securities law. What does that mean for me? It means you need to be very careful about what you know and when you knew it. You've done nothing wrong, but if this becomes a regulatory investigation, marital assets could be frozen. You want to move quickly to separate your finances and establish what's yours. She paused. June, I want you to think very carefully about whether there's anything else you haven't told me. There's one more thing, I said, and I don't know what to do with it yet. What I hadn't told her, what I hadn't told anyone, was that the night I'd come home from Portland, I'd found something else. Not a receipt, not a bank statement. A text thread visible for 10 seconds on my husband's phone before he came back into the room and I looked away. The thread was with someone saved in his phone only as initials, 2 letters, not Adeline Marsh's initials, someone else entirely. I'd been carrying that for 4 days, not sure what it meant, not sure I wanted to know. That evening, I sat my husband down one more time. I spoke with Adeline Marsh today, I said. He didn't move. He barely breathed. She told me about the pre-IPO access, the introduction you were trying to arrange outside your firm. The colour left his face in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. June, I need you to be honest with me about one more thing, I said, and I need you to understand that I already have reason to believe whatever you tell me is a lie, so choose carefully. He nodded. Barely. Who is WC? The silence that followed told me everything before he opened his mouth. He told me the whole thing, slowly, like someone dismantling something they'd spent months constructing. WC was the founder of the biotech company Adeline had told me about. He'd made contact privately, outside the introduction he'd been trying to engineer through her. He'd been corresponding with this person for 2 months. He transferred money, our money, into a private investment vehicle associated with the company. Not $11,000. The full amount he'd moved out of our savings, plus a personal loan he'd taken against his 401k without telling me. He'd been running a parallel financial life inside our marriage for the better part of a year. The emotional entanglement with Adeline was real, but it had also been, in some calculated part of his thinking, a door he was trying to open. I didn't yell. I'd thought I would, but I didn't. I told him to call a lawyer. Not mine. His own. I told him I would be filing for divorce and that I expected full financial transparency through the process, or I would have no choice but to share what I knew with his firm's compliance department. He asked me if I still loved him. I thought about the rooftop bar again, the cities we'd wanted to live in, the maple tree we'd planted, the kitchen we'd kept meaning to renovate. I loved the person I thought you were, I said. I'm not sure yet who you actually are. The divorce took 7 months. My attorney was calm and thorough and never once made me feel like I was being dramatic. The financial disclosure process revealed the full extent of the private investment, over $30,000 of marital assets moved without my knowledge or consent. We negotiated a settlement that accounted for it. I kept the house. He walked away with his retirement accounts and significantly less than he'd have been entitled to if he'd been honest. He left Portland. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. The day the decree came through, I took the afternoon off and walked along the waterfront. It was March, overcast and cold, and the river was running high and grey. I bought a coffee from a cart and stood at the railing and watched a cargo ship move slowly downstream. I called my sister from there. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly, like I'm standing at the beginning of something I can't see yet. "That's not the worst place to be," she said. She was right. I know she was right. What I know now that I didn't know 12 months ago is that the most dangerous lies in a marriage aren't the dramatic ones. They're the quiet, compounding ones. The omissions. The small redirections. The version of events that's close enough to the truth that you keep waiting for things to make sense instead of asking why they don't. I also know that the woman who stood at a hotel breakfast buffet in Portland and smiled and introduced herself and said in a voice she barely recognized as her own, "I'm his wife." That woman was already beginning to save herself. She just didn't know it yet. The kitchen renovation started last month. I picked the countertops myself, white oak cabinets, matte-like hardware, concrete floors. My sister says it looks like a different house. I told her that was exactly the point.